Hi there, this is Carol Best coming to you today with a tutorial on how I achieve my machine binding or applying binding on my quilts solely with the machine. I start with my 2.5 inch strip of fabric as my binding, fold it in half and apply it or stitch it on to the back of my quilt, and with a approximately 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I then take my iron and I iron the binding upward, creating a nice crisp edge on that binding. That will help me roll it as I continue on. All right, now I'm going to flip it to the front, and I'm going to show you just this corner here, so you can, you'll get the gist of the edge, but the corner gets to be a little bit more interesting as well. So I do use Elmer's school glue. It is washable, and so the first time that you wash your quilt, it will be removed. If it is a table runner or maybe a wall hanging, don't worry about it. The edge of your quilt, you're going to put so little on here that it is not even going to make for any crispy edges, or you know how glue can get kind of gunk up your corners. So no worries there. All right, I do put my glue into a bottle that has a finer tip for application. The tip of the Elmer's glue does work. It's just I'm a little heavy-handed with this, so it lays down a little bit thicker line of glue on the quilt, and that's not the desired. You want a nice thin line. I did find these little bottles in a group of 3 at Hobby Lobby in the the area that you would use to decorate your clothing or t-shirts and that type of thing. I think it's used for tie-dyeing actually. So onward and forward. I am just going to go ahead and lay a thin line of glue down along just a small portion. About a 6-inch portion is about as far as I want to reach with this. And make sure all your little frayed parts of your quilt kind of stays in there. And then I just roll it. I roll it and I'll hold it with my fingertips, making sure that the edge of your binding is beyond your stitch line. You want to cover up that stitch line because you are going to stitch it down beyond that, just as you would if you were hand stitching it. If you are going to enter this quilt into competition, which I am not going to, this is actually a customer quilt, and I would go ahead and do the traditional method of stitching to the front and stitching the binding to the front and hand stitching it closed to the back, just as I traditionally would. Now you can see that I leave the iron on for quite some time. That's just heat setting this. So you can see here that it creates a nice crisp edge to your binding. So now I'm not going to have any gaps in my binding when I go to stitch this down. So I'll just continue on here to the corner and making sure that when I pull it, that I'm not pulling beyond. I'm just keeping a nice smooth edge of my binding. I want it to be as straight as possible, not pulling in one spot a little bit more aggressively than another. And I'll just hold that for a second here. All right, now I'm coming down the other side, and there we go. So at this point, I need to make a miter on this corner. So I'm just going to pull or kind of pinch that corner fabric in, making sure that I get up and over that stitch line. And if a pin helps you with this, go for it. I just use my fingertips. You can actually feel on the fabric when you're holding it if you're beyond that stitching line, because it kind of creates a little ridge. So I'm just going to hold that iron, and this little iron, as I'm holding this in place here, this little iron is a little Dritz iron, and I'll tell you what, it has saved my fingertips more times than not. When I was doing this with my large Rowenta iron, I would burn my fingertips so often because it's clumsy. I'm looking over here, not paying attention what's going around my fingers. And this little iron is just really a nice, features. Just the size by itself. It has a solid sole plate. It's got a few holes up here for steam. This iron gets really hot, so doing this type of technique really works well with this. So you can see I've got a nice miter here, and I can continue on throughout my quilt. I do have one that's already done and stitched down, so you can take a look at it. Let me get it in here so you can see, and let me see if I can get a nice close-up here. So you can see, and of course, this is a customer quilt, so of course everything has to match. So I've got a nice running stitch along the edge here and along here. You pivot at the corner. Nice miter that, it's just a really nice professional polished look, I think. And if you look to the back, and I don't know if you can pick it up or not, this edge is directly down into the stitch, the ditch, if you will, and it comes to the corner. I'm a little off over here. It's not quite into the ditch. It is probably a 1/16 of an inch off of that ditch, but you know what? It's pretty darn close. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you, and you get those quilts bound and on to the next project. Of course, again, if you're doing this for competition, go ahead and do the traditional method. But if you want to get binding on quickly with a nice professional look to it, I hope you give this a try. If you have questions, please feel free to email me at carol@simplythebestquilting.com. If you'd like to check out my website, please do so at simplythebestquilting.com. If you're not aware that my business name is Simply the Best Quilting, I use it a lot. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time.